Hello and welcome to CS201. This is Ben Geisler. We will be covering Chapter 3 content today, and there will be a quiz at the end of this video. So Chapter 3 is about the internet and the web. This is a pretty basic chapter, just about history of the internet, history of the web, that kind of thing, and some pretty basic questions regarding that. So, the internet is basically just a connection of networked computers all over the place. It goes back as far as the 60s, where Licklider produced a series of articles describing how various computers could be networked together. Eventually, Licklider became the head of computer research at ARPA, and ARPANET was, of course, the famous roots of the internet. Larry Roberts also had something to do with this. He was hired early on to help create the internet. ARPANET was the original internet. This was connected to computers at 4 different universities: UCLA, UCSB, SRI, and Utah. It employed a series of dedicated cables which were buried underground. The highest transfer rate at the time, which was quite fast for the time, was 56 bits per second. That's about the same as the dial-up is today, which for back in the 69, that was really fast. Of course, for now, that's extremely slow. So at the different universities and things like that, professors, students could communicate with each other. In '71, they connected more sites, and the closest being to us was actually in Illinois at UCIS, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. They used a series of terminal interface processors, TIPs, which would allow for 64 terminal applications at each site. This expanded in the 80s to include about 100 sites connected to ARPANET by 1980. And these would provide satellite connections to provide links to cities outside the continental US as well. So it truly started to become the internet at this stage. Electronic email started around this time. Remote logins started around this time, and researchers at almost every college and university wanted to be part of this. By the mid 80s, there were about 1,000 such connections to the internet, to ARPANET. To accommodate further growth, the NSF became involved in '84, and NSFNet was created in '91. This shows a map of NSFNet. So the NSFNet was originally, the term internet was coined in the early '90s because of the similarities between the interstate highway system and NSFNet, with the idea being that connections could happen between many different populated locations, with the backbone being similar to what you might think of as an interstate highway system. And then from the main backbone, we'd have local connections to remote individual computers. Just as a quick side note, Al Gore did not invent the internet, believe it or not. Interestingly, he never actually claimed he did. He did sponsor legalization in the 80s to support growth and expand access to the internet. So, moving on. It was recognized that continued growth would be needed, so they decided to privatize the internet And just the way our economy works, that would lead to a more widespread usage of the internet if these lines were handed over to private organizations such as AT&T, Verizon, Sprint. And the government decided that basically R&D would be administered by the Internet Society. Internet Society, founded in '92, still exists. It was founded as a way to maintain and enforce standards, such as like the TCP/IP standards that we all know today that we'll be talking about in a little bit. Various committees that were formed to be able to manage technical activities as well as the overall architecture of the internet, and various protocols and that kind of thing was what the Internet Society was all about. The trend has slowed, but for the most part, every 1 to 2 years, the number of connected computers to the internet doubles. So right now, the actual number is well over a billion connected things on the internet. I think it's at around, if you take a look at stats online, you'll see that's over 2 billion computers connected to the internet. In 2010, it was at 758,000. So it hasn't quite been doubling. It took till about 2014 to get to 2 billion. But now things have slowed a little bit because we're hitting, overall, we're hitting more and more remote areas, and it's becoming more and more difficult to have a doubling every year. But we are seeing continued growth in, especially as we talk about the Internet of Things and some of these other future trends in internet technology. As far as the design of the network, this is a distributed network with packet switching. Those are two technical terms that made the internet possible. The goal with distributed networks is to allow communication to take place where in parts of the network where even some computers may be down or slow. That allows for failure of any single machine to not affect the rest of the network. So if you take a look at the picture at the right, that's a distributed network. So there's alternate routes between A and B that can include, for example, going through a tertiary computer or one or more tertiary computers, versus the one on the left shows A and B just connected by that one computer. That was a very important part of the internet because basically all information has to propagate to all different nodes on the internet, and that way we can know that it's more secure, it's faster, it's more stable. Packet switching refers to the idea that information will be broken up into packets and then sent over the network and then redistributed or reassembled as one piece of information at the receiving end. This means that whenever you send a piece of information, for example, like an email, that will actually be broken up into multiple small packets. The smaller packets make it easier to send them from one place to another because they're smaller. They can go over the fastest possible line to get to the receiver. If your email instead was kept together as one whole message, it would need to find a line that's dedicated to getting to the recipient quickly. That is very hard to do in the internet. Usually there's multiple ways to get from point A to point B. And for that reason, it's more consistent with the design of the internet to have this broken up into small packets. So this way, we don't have large messages monopolizing a connection. We can essentially say, here's a bunch of small little messages that can get sent quickly through the network and quickly give control back to someone else. Also, transmitting packets allows the network to react to failures of network congestion very quickly. Routers can see that there's failures there. They can reroute packets through a different network. They can basically say, okay, this part of the network is down, therefore we're going to reroute all the packets to a different part. This means that packets can be received more reliably as well. So we see that reliability is increased by packets. Basically, the software at the receiving destination reassembles the packets, and that way the entire message will become whole at the time of receiving it. Very important topic is protocols and addresses. The networking communication course covers this in greater detail, but basically transmission control protocol is TCP, and IP stands for Internet Protocol. These are two central protocols that were developed to basically agree on the rules on which packets would be sent. Each computer has a unique identifier. This will be, for example, like 147.134.2.84. Usually local ones start with 168 or 10. So you'll see like 168.0.0.1 or 168.0.0.2. Those are local addresses. IP addresses usually have 4 different sections, each separated by a period. These are known as unique identifiers, and they are used for internet transmissions. So the TCP/IP protocol allows for messages to be broken down and then reassembled. The TCP itself is the method on which the message is actually broken down, and IP is labeling the packets for delivery and making sure they get to their destinations. Likewise, routers and DNS are responsible for receiving the packets and getting them to the actual computer that is at the destination. So, for example, when you're connected to a computer on campus here, there's a router somewhere that basically is saying, go out to the internet, get the information for what I'm receiving, and deliver it to your specific computer. DNS stores domain names such as google.com, cnn.com, crichton.edu, UWGB.edu. You can see some examples of these in the book, but domain names are basically what we come to expect as our internet addresses. And those are translated into IP addresses by the domain name server, which is the DNS. So, for example, 147.134.2.84, which is used in the slide here, is translated to www.crichton.edu by what's called a domain name server lookup. That domain name server lookup knows how to translate the numbered address into a named address. So on top of the internet, there's the web. The web, first proposed by Tim Berners-Lee, is a way to facilitate information over the internet. This relies upon hypertext, which is what we're studying in class, HTML, and the distributed nature of the internet, so that basically there'll be a web server serving up HTML pages. So like icslinux.edu, for example, is our web server that serves up pages to the internet. Here is just some web timeline stuff showing Berners-Lee developing prototypes in the 90s, Netscape being the main navigator in 94, IE 95, but by 2009, Firefox and Google Chrome are the main web browsers. So the web relies on protocols to ensure that pages are accessible to any computer. It basically assembles pages via HTML. The transfer protocol that's used is HTTP, and that is the specifier that you use before a URL. And that basically says use the hypertext transfer protocol method in which to deliver web pages from one spot to another. Also, most browsers cache pages. So, for example, if you go to to Google, you might get a cached page because you've already been there. That is because that allows for redundant downloads to not be a problem. If you hit like Control F5 or something, you can force the cache to recache itself, basically. But the next time it's loaded, it will always check the cache first, and if it finds that there's an appropriate result there, it will give you the cache copy. and the server will send you that back instead of re-getting that actually from the internet. It will just give you a cached copy. And that is all for Chapter 3. There will be a quiz online. Thank you.